Good evening. I'm David Levine. I know some people are getting into the room, so I'm going to hold off on questions, but I want to introduce my guest, Melinda Wenner Moyer, who is a contributing editor of Scientific American and a regular contributor to the New York Times, Washington Post, as well as other national magazines and newspapers. She's a faculty member in the Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting program at NYU's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. Her first book is what we'll be discussing tonight. And the name of the book is How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes. It was published in July 2021. Melinda was the recipient of the 2019 Bricker Award for Science Writing and Medicine, and her work was featured in the 2020 Best American Science and Nature Writing Anthology. She has a master's in Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting from NYU, and a background in cell and molecular biology. She lives in New York's Hudson Valley with her husband, 2 children, and her dog. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, David.
Oh, well,
and by the way, I have 2 dogs now. We just got another dog, so it's like
another dog.
double the chaos in the house right now.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Why not add a little more chaos? Yeah.
I also want to thank my co-chair, Joe Bonner, who is running this behind the scenes, and he's taping this and will be on YouTube, so people can watch it forever. So, someone once criticized me and said, you didn't ask me, why'd you write this book? So I'm going to ask you, why'd you write this book?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess too, maybe I'll give a little context as to like why I started getting into parenting writing, having started as a science writer too. So I have been freelancing now for 15 years. And at first I was really focused on like hard science, molecular biology, genetics, and medicine. And then I had a son 10 years ago, and essentially I just had a gazillion questions about how to keep him alive, among other things, and what to do when he did various things like had tantrums. And so I started turning to science to get answers to my parenting questions and realized, wow, there's actually a lot that science could tell us about parenting. And so I then started writing a parenting column for Slate for 8 years, I think. And I basically just answered my own parenting questions as part of this column, and used science and experts to help. And then about 3 years ago, as my kids are getting older, and I was starting to think a lot about what they were learning from the world. I felt like there was just a lot of bad behavior happening, and that there were a lot of people in positions of power who were behaving not very nicely. And I wondered, what are my kids learning from this? What are they absorbing from this? And I knew from social learning theory from the 1960s that kids and adults, they learn how to behave based on what they see other people doing, and especially powerful people. So I was wondering, are they learning that it's appropriate to act like a bully or to say racist and sexist things from what they're seeing around them? So I really got kind of concerned about that, and I also just more than anything else realized like I want to know what I can do to raise good human beings. So I once again decided to turn to the science, and I said, I wonder if there's research on this. And it turned out there was tons of research on kind of all these different disparate topics that I felt like were under this umbrella of raising a good human being. And I talked to other parents too. And I was, like, is this something that you're worried about? Are you worried about who your kids are going to become? And I got a lot of yeses and a lot of people saying, yeah, this feels like a pressing question right now in the world we're in. So that was really the impetus for the book. And actually, I was out to dinner with my husband one night. It was our anniversary. And the idea of the book came to me in the middle of dinner. I just turned to him and I said, I should write a book called How to Raise Kids Who Aren't A-Holes. That just came out of my mouth and out of nowhere. And then I looked at him. He's also a science journalist. He's a deputy editor at Quantum magazine. And he looked at me and we were like, oh, this is it. I think this is your book. And then the next day I emailed my agent and was like, I finally have a book idea, because I'd been wanting to write a book, but I wasn't sure what. So that's the backstory.
Okay, so I want to read you a quote, and it says, "The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. Now, where do you think that quote came from?
I don't know.
Okay, so that's from Socrates.
Okay, long time ago. I was going to say, I bet it was from a very long time ago, because people have been saying this forever about the young generation, just being terrible. That's really funny. Yeah,
But,
that's very telling.
there's a child psychiatrist who has that framed in his office.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That was funny. So I have children. I also have grandchildren. And, and there's one other thing I would like to read. And then, then we'll talk about it. But you said, parenting is hard. I'll say it yet again. No matter what we do, our kids will constantly challenge us because that is how they learn and grow. You may wonder at times if they are absorbing any of what we try to instill in them. But every once in a while, if we're watching closely, we will catch glimpses of the fundamental goodness underneath all their layers and be able to envision the kind of people they are becoming. So parenting is hard. I know that. I remember
That one I recognize. Yeah.
You wrote that. But
Yeah.
I remember my kids don't like it when I talk, but my daughter saying, "You don't know how hard it is to raise kids." I said, "Yeah, I do."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I was talking to Gretchen Rubin, who I've interviewed several times, and she was saying, try this as an experiment. One day, don't say a critical thing about anyone, your husband or your children. She said, it was the hardest day of my life. Mm. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is, yep, that's
so,
it's hard to do that.
So let's talk about your book, and then people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'm sure there are a lot of people who have questions about children. And so one thing I do want to talk about, I was very interested in siblings. Mm-hmm. And I mean, no one could get under my skin more than my late sister. No one. I mean, she could just, in 2 seconds, she can get under my skin. I don't know why, maybe it goes back to, very early days, but it's siblings don't always get along, and
yeah, they often don't.
They often don't, and they're often different. And the other observation is, you go to a parent-teacher conference, and the teacher says, your son is so well behaved at school, just a blessing. And I remember looking at my then wife saying to me, did she mistake him for someone else?
Yeah. Yep. They reserve their bad behavior for the people they trust, that they know will love them no matter what, their parents. That's actually a good sign. When your kids, act up around you, they save it for when they get home. That's because they know that you'll love them, even if they act out, even if, they defy you. And so that's a sign of, in a way, it's a sign of love and trust. That's how I see it sometimes. I try to put a good spin on it anyway.
But it's not always fun.
Oh, it's not. It's really hard. It's really hard.
It's hard. So do you feel that children are less empathetic than they were 10 years ago? Do we have evidence of that?
There is a little bit of evidence. Now these studies are not, they're hard to control. It's hard to be sure that what they're measuring is real, but there have been some studies that suggest that at least compared to kids, these were college students who were surveyed, and they were asked questions about, how much do you care about other people, and what do you think about yourself, and how much do you like to look in the mirror, and all these kinds of questions. And they found that compared to a few decades ago, that college students now, and this study was conducted maybe 5 or 6 years ago, are less empathetic and a little more narcissistic. But there has been research that's kind of challenged that as well. I do think we have to be careful. I mean, to your point with the Socrates quote, we always think as we get older that, the young generation is going to hell, right? We always think that. And we think that, the changes that are happening are going to destroy the generation. And this is just, part of how we see the world as we get older. So I think we have to be careful not to sort of fall into that trap. I know that, and actually, I think you sent me a survey that just came out today, maybe. I know that parents.
It's still under embargo. So,
okay, I will not refer to that. I will refer to other stuff.
We can refer to the headline.
I don't want to break any embargoes. Okay. Well, I do know that parents are often asked, do you want your kids to be kind and compassionate people? And then also, do you think your kids are kind and compassionate people? And parents overwhelmingly say, yes, I really think this is important. And especially recently, parents have said, I think kindness is one of the most important qualities to instill in kids. But then they also say, but I do not think that my kids are very kind or compassionate. And, I think we also have to remember that kids, their brains are so different from ours. They have, the part of their brain that controls, rational thinking, planning, impulse control, that really doesn't finish maturing until kids are 25. And, a lot of what we think of as good behavior is learned. It's not innate, manners, and there's so much of good behavior that's really like cultural and social expectations. And kids have to learn that. And the way they learn is by making the mistakes, is by breaking the rules. So we can say, oh, that's not polite. That's not how you do this. That's not how you should handle that. So kids are, as I say in my book, like kids are kind of supposed to act like a-holes. That is, that's just a reflection of their developing brain, the fact that they don't have the skills we think, that we expect sometimes that they should have. And so it's very normal for kids to be difficult and challenging. And I'm not sure if kids are more difficult and challenging than in years past, but I do think there are things that we have to worry about that we didn't have to worry about, like social media and the internet and all sorts of, ways that kids could get influenced nefariously, I suppose. But
so in the beginning, you said how you turned to the science when you had questions. Did you also speak to your pediatrician? Because I found my pediatrician, great. She had many, many years of experience. Yeah, that's because my son would sometimes throw a tantrum and bang his head once. And she said, well, it would, if really, but just ignore it, which is hard to ignore. He said, or if it really hurt him, he wouldn't do it. But, so that's something you're not going to always find in science. I mean, so pediatricians have years of experience with kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly interview a lot of pediatricians in the work that I do in my book. I talk to my own pediatrician when our kids are having issues. I find that they're very, very helpful. But I love child psychologists too. And a lot of my sources for the book were academic research psychologists who were actually, doing studies with kids, because I find that really interesting work. And it can be, I really did want to turn to the evidence as much as I could, because I do find sometimes that experts who aren't really familiar with the research, they sometimes go back to theory when it comes to parenting. There's a lot of theories about how best to parent. And I wanted to get past that. And I wanted to say, okay, theory is great and all, but there's so many conflicting theories about what to do, for instance, in response to a tantrum. There's many different ways, and different pediatricians will tell you different things. So I did also want to look at the science and say, but what does the evidence really tell us? And obviously the studies have limitations. They're not perfect. And they tell us averages. They don't tell us, because obviously every child is different and every family is different, and what works with one child may not work with another. But I still wanted to look at, what does the data say, and use that as my guide.
So motivating kids. So let's talk about, you write about procrastination. And I was very interested in that, because one of the operating phrases was, in a minute, just a minute. I'll do it in a minute. So I'll get to it. Don't worry. And what strategy, it says teach strategies to minimize procrastination.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Procrastination, I mean, it's a very natural thing. And what's interesting is the research now suggests that we procrastinate to escape from negative feelings. So if we're, we might be facing a deadline, as we do as science writers, for instance, or kids might have a homework assignment that's really overwhelming, or, or maybe it's just really boring, and and doing it therefore is like kind of brings up negative feelings. And so we procrastinate to kind of escape those negative feelings. And so it's completely natural behavior. I mean, it's something that, it's kind of innate. And so procrastination is fairly normal, but yeah, in terms of helping kids to stop procrastinating, there's different things you can do. I mean, first of all, minimizing distractions is helpful. So if they've got, their phone in front of them and it's lighting up with text messages every 2 seconds, that is not going to help. So you try to, minimize distractions. And also just to help kids break big tasks up into littler ones. So, with me anyway, I procrastinate the most when I have some really huge, daunting thing. I have a feature to write. Oh my God, that's how do I tackle that? So by helping kids break those big gargantuan tasks into tiny, smaller ones, like, okay, well, today, what can you do? What's the first thing you can do to take a step towards this big project? And then tomorrow, what's the one thing you can do? And you break it into smaller things so that it seems more manageable. And also each day they have the experience of accomplishing something. And I talk about success spirals in the book too, and how when kids can feel like they've succeeded at, some part of something or some, little step, and they feel that success, that then propels them forward to the next step. So you want to give them little inner rewards to feel like, wow, okay, I did that part of it and that feels good. And now I'm going to move on to the next one. So those are some techniques, but it's hard. Like procrastination is a real problem. And it will rear its head over and over again, I think, but those are some of the strategies I talk about.
Yeah, well, I did notice, with my children that, just doing like regular homework was fine, but then doing a project, that was much more complex for them. And I said, when's it due? I said, tomorrow. I said, tomorrow?
Uh-oh. Well, it gets back to what I was saying about their brains too, though, that the part of the brain that really can help with these big tasks. I mean, it involves planning out and thinking rationally and really like step-by-step organization. And that frontal lobe in kids is just, it's not really ready to do that. It's hard for kids to do that. And so they really do sometimes need the scaffolding from parents and teachers to help them like break it down and plan ahead and think, here's how I can get it done in increments, because it is hard for them.
You also talk a lot about, teaching kids about race and talking to them about race, and how do you do it? How important is it? When should you do it? At what age? At what age?
Yeah. So I was mostly writing this chapter for white parents because I think white parents have the most to learn in this area. And one thing that white parents often think is that if I don't talk about race with my kids, if I don't, mention it, draw attention to it, then my kids just won't notice it, and they won't make a big deal out of it. They won't grow up to be racist. And this is an approach called colorblind parenting. It's very, very common, and it's understandable why we think that's the best thing to do. But the research really strongly contradicts that this is productive. And one reason is kids, we know from research, they see skin color, they notice it from a very young age, from the time they're babies. And they also, so kids are like little detectives when they're little. They're constantly looking around the world trying to understand, what's important, what should I be paying attention to, what social categories are important. I mean, we are very much social animals. So even as little toddlers, we're kind of like trying to figure out, what are the social rules and categories that matter. And one thing they actually pretty quickly pick up on is that there's a very salient racial hierarchy in our world. I mean, they can tell that, wow, white people tend to be in positions of power in our country, and people of color tend to not be. And they see it in their school system. They see it sometimes in the gifted classes versus not gifted classes. Wow, there's a lot more white kids in the gifted classes, and maybe there's a lot more, white kids in the nice neighborhood. And so they're noticing this. So to them, they recognize that race is somehow important, and they see that from a young age. And if we aren't explaining to them why this hierarchy exists and that, historically racism has played a huge role in shaping this, then they're going to try to come to the simplest conclusion. They're going to say, okay, well, then why are white people so much wealthier and more powerful? And really the simplest conclusion, if you're a kid, is, well, white people maybe are just smarter and better. And so kids start to think this way if we don't jump in there with our, with explanations that are actually true and reflect reality. So, but how do you do that? I think that was a really good part of this question that you asked, because it's hard, because I think so many white parents grew up in families where we just didn't talk about race. It was not something, and we thought that was for the best. So it's really, really hard to start doing it. But what I try to do, I mean, first of all, kids will sometimes point out race, and, you're in the grocery store and your 3-year-old says, like, look at that lady, her skin is so dark. And our instincts are often like, we're mortified, we're embarrassed, we're horrified that our kids just pointed out race in the middle of a public place. So we often do things like we shush our kids. We say, don't, you're not allowed to say that, or that's not okay to say, or you try to shut it down with something like, we're all the same on the inside. It doesn't matter what you look like. And when we do that, we're basically telling kids, like, don't talk to us about this. This is not a welcome subject. So instead, what we should do is try to stay calm and normalize it and say, yeah, her skin is darker than ours is. And skin color comes, and skin comes in all different colors, and it's great. And, you can even talk about the science, like the reason skin colors vary is because of a chemical called melanin that we have in our skin. And if you have more of it, your skin is darker. And that's often because your ancestors, and your parents had more of it too. And, I mean, you can describe it and explain it however you like. But the point is, like, you don't want to tell your kids, this is not okay to talk to me about, because you do want to have these conversations, and you do want to just sort of make it to them another thing, just an aspect of the world that you can talk about, and that is not, something that they should feel ashamed about or feel like they can't engage with you about. So, and then I try to bring it up in other ways. Like if we drive around and we see a Black Lives Matter sign, I use that as a entry point for a conversation. Like, hey, there's another Black Lives Matter sign. Do you remember what that means? And why do people have Black Lives Matter signs? And just, we talk about race and we talk about racism, even though it is really hard. And it's sometimes I say the wrong things and I have to go back later and say, I don't think I framed that or explained that well. And let me try it again. And that's okay to do too.
So you don't have a topic a night that you discuss with your children. Today we're going to discuss race, today we're going to discuss gender. I mean,
no, I mean, I think you could absolutely do that and be intentional about it that way. I don't. I try to sort of, I just do it more organically. If there's something that's related to an issue like sexism or racism or, anything, homophobia that's come up in my life or in current events or something, then I will sometimes bring it up at dinner and say, hey, let me tell you about this thing that happened to me, or let me tell you about this thing that's happening in the world that's pretty important and that you should know about. So I do, I look for prompts, but if, sometimes I will decide like, hey, I haven't talked about X issue in a while, and I think of a way to bring it up at dinner or in the car with my kids. I find bringing stuff up in the car is actually pretty great because they can't escape and they're often bored and they're happy to have a long conversation about things. I was talking with my son about swear words in the car on the way to soccer practice the other day, and talking about, why it's inappropriate to use certain words, and, who can he say swear words around and who can't he, and which swear words should you never say because they're really terrible, hateful words. And we had this conversation, and he was happy to do it because he had nothing else to do in the car. So
sometimes you take them for drives a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I should just strap him in the car and off we go.
It's also a good way to get babies who won't go to sleep.
Absolutely. Yes. Use that trick a lot. Yeah.
So there's been lots of talk, about bullying at schools, cyberbullying. And I remember one comedian said cyberbullying. He said, I have a solution, turn the computer off. But kids like to, watch it. Do you think it's any worse than it was years ago? Or is it more that, like on Twitter, you say a comment and then 100 people will comment and they argue back and forth?
Yeah. Well, cyberbullying is a real problem, and it's a new problem. When I talk to bullying researchers about it, they they see it as under the larger umbrella of bullying. They don't see it as an entirely distinct phenomenon. It's really part of bullying and if we think of it in the same way as we just think of bullying and anti-bullying strategies, it can be helpful. I do think there has been some evidence that bullying in general has increased in recent years. There's not a lot. I wish we had more data and better data, but there's a few studies that suggest it has gotten worse, and that, hate language and hate crimes in schools have been more common as well. So that is really worrying. And that is one of the reasons too, I wanted to write the book. I saw that data and I saw the statistics on hate crimes, and just in general in the US, hate crimes have been going up. And that to me, that's extremely worrying. And so I was thinking about my kids. Yeah, it's a big problem. It's a big problem in schools. And I think we also know that a lot of anti-bullying programs don't work that well, especially with older kids. So I talked in my book about how social emotional learning programs that schools sometimes adopt, those can actually be more effective than the specific anti-bullying programs that schools adopt, because the social emotional learning lessons, they often start early in elementary school, and they really help kids become more empathetic and more compassionate. And there's some research I thought that was really interesting in the bullying literature that suggests that I think we often think of bullies as, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're trying to be hurtful, and they're just mean, terrible kids. And there certainly are bullies like that, but there are also kids who engage in bullying who don't really recognize that what they're doing is as hurtful as it is. They lack empathy, and they lack a skill called theory of mind, which is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And so one of the best ways to develop theory of mind skills is through social emotional learning programs, through talking about feelings and just getting kids more emotionally literate, because being able to understand and perceive other people's feelings and look at somebody else and know how they're feeling, that's really important for the development of theory of mind. And it's also really important for reducing the risk that a child will engage in bullying. Because again, some of that bullying is because there's just a gap in skills where kids they can't see the effects of what they're doing. And so these programs can be helpful. And just talking about feelings as parents, having these conversations and tying kids' behaviors to their effects on other people can be very powerful too for building that skill. So a lot of times, like now, if my kids do something that I don't like, instead of just saying, please don't do that or stop it or whatever, I will try to go that extra step and explain, why I'm asking them to stop and how it's affecting either me or a sibling or someone else. So like my kids leave Legos out all the time, and I will say, please put your Legos away, because otherwise one of us is going to step on it and it's really going to hurt, and so I'm always trying to link it to, here's why I'm asking you to do this. Here's how it could hurt someone, so that they're thinking more about themselves in this bigger whole. They're part of a family, they're part of a community, and what they do and the choices they make, they affect other people, and they always need to be considering that.
I speak to friends, and one of the common complaints is that, they don't hear from their kids. Like we used to call our parents, even before the era of cell phones, we wrote letters to our parents, and they said, I called my parents, didn't hear anything for 2 weeks, or you text them and they don't respond. And many of my friends feel that a lot of their kids are entitled. And if they call you and you don't answer, they're like, what they're like furious, and their view is kind of like, we've let them get away with this because we were trying to be enlightened adults and trying to, our parents would not put up with this kind of behavior, and I'm just wondering. Is there some common ground? I mean, it's nice to be common and sensitive, and like it's kind of like this, thing. Everybody's a winner. Everyone should get a medal or something. The team. That was in the Meet the Parents, or
Yeah.
And there are parents who wish for the old days when you called your neighbor Mister, and all these kinds of things. Or I have friends who say, my kids are my best friends. And I say, no, they're not. You're their parent.
Yeah.
They're not friends. So do you think something has changed in there, or is that just going back to cyber, par for the course?
There's a lot in what you just asked, a lot of things that are interlinked there. I think that there are some things that parents do nowadays that do, I think, lead to entitlement in ways that we don't intend. I think parents are, we want to protect our kids, and in doing so, sometimes we are too protective. We protect kids from disappointment, and we protect kids from challenges, and we protect kids from failures. And we think we're doing this, and we're doing a good thing because we don't want our kids to go through something difficult. But when kids never have the chance to feel disappointed, like when they demand something in the grocery store and we give in every time, and they never have to feel that disappointment of, no, you can't have this, I'm putting my foot down, then yeah, it leads to a feeling of entitlement. And so I think we have to be careful that we do, not always give in to our kids, that we let them experience frustration, we let them experience disappointment, and that that's normalized, and they realize, oh, I can feel upset for a few minutes, I can feel disappointed that I'm not going to get this thing I want, and then I'll get over it, and it's okay. And so I do think we need to be intentional about that and not always give in to our kids. Another thing that I know parents do sometimes is, like, when they're playing board games, they throw the games for their kids. They let their kids win every time because they don't want their kids to feel that disappointment of losing the game. But that's not really teaching good things. We don't want our kids to think they're always going to win, because they're not always going to win. And we need to normalize that disappointment, right? And so I do think that sometimes right now our culture is very protective of kids. There's a lot of helicopter parenting, and that can indirectly, inadvertently fuel feelings of entitlement. And so I do think we need to be careful about that. And it also undermines resiliency, because, if we are rushing in to help our kids every time they're struggling with their homework, or, every time they're learning a new skill and they're struggling, and we go and do it for them, then we're communicating that, feeling challenged is bad, and we don't want you to feel that. And, we're not letting them develop new skills. So we want our kids to feel frustrated and challenged, and then to experience, getting past that, and to live with that, and then slowly develop a skill and realize, wow, I was frustrated and it was hard, but then I got better at it. And so maybe challenges and frustration are kind of part of learning and part of growing, and I should embrace them rather than reject them. And I talk a lot about growth mindset in my book, which is essentially another way to use your language to help kids embrace challenges and to normalize challenge as something that helps you get better at something, rather than as something that, is evidence that you're bad at something. So yeah, I do think there are some things that parents do, maybe more than they used to, that are not, we do it because we think it's best for our kids, but ultimately in the long run, it is not what's best for our kids.
I remember once being at some distant cousin's house, and his son was playing a board game, and he said, I lost. And he just threw up the game.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? I mean, my kids, we try to let them lose a lot, but they still sometimes have a meltdown afterwards. And that's part, they have trouble with emotional regulation, kids do, and losing is hard. So in a way that's normal. But the more that they lose, the better they get at it, and the more they can take it in stride. You just gotta normalize it.
So, I mean, there's an assumption in your book that most parents want to raise kind and empathetic goods. And I was thinking, because there's a new movie coming out about Serena Williams and Venus Williams' father, called Richard, which is, I think, starting tomorrow on movies on HBO Max. And he was raising winners. He wasn't, he wasn't always, we'll say the movie, Will Smith, but he wasn't always so kind to his kids. He made them practice even when they were tired. And I'm not sure the point is, but not every parent has the same goal for a child. I mean, they especially if you want to raise a kid who's a winner. And like Andrew Agassi, said he would call his father, and his father would say, "Did you win?" That was the only question he had. And his mother would say, "Did you have a good time today?" Mm-hmm. And that's a big difference. And,
yeah.
And I mean, I'm very lucky. I happen to have nice kids, and they have good professions, and they're happily married. But my son ran a marathon, and he really trained it. He wanted to do well, and he became very, very competitive, and got a black belt in Taekwondo. So he learned sometimes you have to be better than other kids and win.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's really a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so either. I mean, I think you can be ambitious and still be a compassionate and kind person. I think those can absolutely coexist. And you can be, competitive to some degree, and that doesn't mean you're a bad person. I agree. And different parents have different priorities for their kids. Maybe not everybody cares about their kids growing up to be, kind people. Maybe that's not a priority for everyone, but, I got the sense that this is important for parents right now, and which is one of the reasons I felt like my book was timely, but certainly not everybody's going to feel that way. And, so the book isn't for everyone.
Well, but I think there is a perception that we don't live in this kind of world. I mean, people are talking now since the pandemic that crime has gone up, racism gone up. Part of it's, Donald Trump, dividing people, but worldwide, there's lots of divisions. I mean, in Austria, if you're not vaccinated, you got to stay home. They just can't start as just you can't leave the house. Mm-hmm. To me, that's a great incentive to get vaccinated. And someone said, if they're in this country, there'll be riots in the street. I said, I don't know. I mean, in New York City, if you want to go to a restaurant, you've got to show proof of vaccination. If you want to go to a theater, you have to show proof of vaccination. If you want to go to a gym, and no one's putting a gun to your head, but I think people are slowly getting the message. Hey, I want to see a play. Mm-hmm. Can't see them fully vaccinated. So I think that's a good way of doing it. But, places where the pandemic was raging, like in China, in Wuhan, they had police patrolling with guns. Don't come out of the house. And they'll shoot people if they come out of the house. So, I think, so I'm leading into a question. Sometimes a parent has to be tough. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just can't let your kids scream and yell, all the time and this kind of stuff. So how do you be tough and still be a good parent?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I do think boundaries and expectations are extremely important. And I think sometimes those are breaking down. I haven't seen data on how parenting styles have been changing. I know that I believe that there's been somewhat of a relaxing in parenting styles from authoritarian parenting, which is more harsh, more strict, more punitive, to authoritative parenting, which is, more negotiating and warmth, but also setting boundaries and expectations. But there is also, I think, and I do not actually have data on this, but this is my feeling, having talked to and observed a lot of families and talked to researchers, that there is more permissive parenting happening now, which is parents who really don't hold their kids accountable. They let their kids kind of decide. Basically, their kids are in charge. And I don't think that's good for kids. So I think you can set limits and have expectations for kids in loving ways. And there's actually a book that just came out that I just finished reading that really goes into detail about how to do this. It's called Why Is My Child in Charge? It's by Claire Lerner, who is wonderful. And I've spoken with her many times. And, she talks about how there are these myths that parents sometimes have that, first of all, like that disappointment is bad, that it's bad if my kid is angry at me or, throwing a tantrum because I set a strict bedtime. No, it's fine for kids to have tantrums. It's fine for kids to have negative feelings. We don't have to protect them from that. And that, we also really should make sure that things are happening that are supposed to be happening, that are teaching kids important skills. So, if we tell our kids they need to clean their room, we need to figure out a way to set up the scenario so that actually happens, so that they follow through. And how do you do that? Well, you can use natural consequences by saying, okay, your room needs to be cleaned, and you have two options. One is you can clean it right now, and then we have time to read together or watch a show together after dinner. The other is you don't clean it and I have to clean it. And if that happens, then we're not going to have time to watch a show together after dinner. And so you really, you set it up so that they actually want to follow through and meet your expectations. And that if they don't, there's consequences. So it doesn't always have to be like punishment per se, where if you don't clean your room, you're locked in your room or you can't leave. I don't know, whatever punishment you're thinking of, but you can still set it up so that there are very clear, natural consequences. And so that you're setting up, incentives in the right way so that kids actually do what you need them to do. So it's a great book. I see Joe just shared it in the chat. I highly recommend it for parents of younger kids who are struggling with basically power struggles, where your kid is just defying you or saying no, and you don't know how to be in authority. You don't know how to be loving, but also like in charge. Because I do think we're supposed to be in charge. Kids thrive when we are not kids' friends, but kids' parents, and we are in charge. And that's really important.
Well, everyone talks about, equal parenting. I remember my kid said, can I do this? I said, sure. And my son said, well, we better ask mom.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I have some questions from the audience, and please put them in the Q&A box so we can get to them. Given that kids learn by making mistakes and given the power of social media to influence their emotional development in a detrimental way, according to the research, are parents faced with the Orwellian but necessary task of monitoring what teens do online, who they befriend, and how much they should share online?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a complicated one. I actually addressed who they can befriend question. I have a newsletter. So after I finished writing my book, I realized I still had 800,000 questions I wanted to answer with science about parenting. So I started a newsletter, which most of the content's actually free, although I do have a paid option as well. And it's on Substack. It's called Is My Kid the Asshole? And my topic this week was, what should you do if you don't like your kid's friends, and how involved should you get? And should you, ban friendships if you think that a kid is a bad influence? So that's part of your question. Your question is really more about social media. So I can start with that. I mean, social media, I worry about social media with my kids, and I'm going to put it off as much as possible in terms of letting my kids have social media access. But I also think that the research is not as clear cut as it's sometimes made out to be. I know that, for instance, there are there's differences in the effects of social media depending on how kids are using it. If they're using it to stay in touch with friends, if they're actively using it, sharing things, they often say that, it doesn't have a negative effect on them. And I think that the research supports that. Whereas if you're using it passively and you're scrolling through and you're seeing other people, at parties you weren't invited to, and you have this fear of missing out, and you also have the social comparison aspects and the body image stuff. Like if you're using it that way, yes, it can absolutely have detrimental effects. But I just want to say, I do think sometimes the claims about the effects of the internet and social media and technology are a little bit alarmist compared to what the research actually tells us. What I have found in the research on how to best support kids and how to best set them up to succeed with social media, with technology, is actually so limiting kids, setting strict limits. We can do that to a degree, but if we don't let kids learn how to use the internet and learn about, what privacy means, and we don't give them the tools to be able to use the internet safely and wisely and be a good person online, they're still going to end up online at some point, right? They're going to be at a friend's house and they're going to end up using the internet, or they're going to be using it at school, or they're going to go off to college and eventually use it. And what we don't want is for them to not have any skills. And what some of the research suggests is that when kids of parents who really just set strict limits on media use, when they actually do get their hands on the internet and start using it, they end up more likely to cyberbully, and they end up more likely to use pornography. And so the worry is that if you just are strict and you set limits, you're missing out on helping your kids develop the skills and the tools that they need to be good people online. So what the research suggest instead is that being more of a mentor with your child, certainly you can still set limits. I'm not saying you shouldn't set any limits, but, allowing your kid to use maybe some social media at a certain age that you think is appropriate, but using it kind of with them, exploring with them. When they come to you saying, I want this app, you go through it with them, you learn about it, you read the rules, you talk about what's expected of them if they're going to use this game or this app. And when you are more of a mentor, you have more opportunities to share your values and your expectations. And so the research really supports that, mentoring with technology and social media can be very, very useful, and that just strictly limiting can backfire sometimes. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And also just we have to be careful how much, especially with tweens and teens, how much we try to control our kids. There's a balance, right? Because if we're overly controlling, our kids are going to rebel. They're not going to listen to us. And that's what I essentially was writing about with the friendship column. I talked to a bunch of experts who've written books on kids' friendships. They really know their stuff. And they were like, you can't engineer your kids' friendships. You can help them, and you can have conversations with them that help them reflect on their friendships and and whether they're really, good friendships, good relationships or not. And you can help them, make good choices. But you really, if you say like, you can't hang out with this friend because I don't like him, that is often going to backfire. And it's also going to damage your relationship with your child. So it's really tricky. If you want to read more about the friendship question, then you can go on my Substack. It's melindawmoyer.substack.com. And it's a long column with a lot of bullet points. I hope it's helpful.
Okay, so someone said there's a limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain a stable social relationship. What do you think of this number, Dunbar's number, in an era that places a huge value on followers, likes on your social media profiles, and become an influencer to strangers, rather than helping a neighbor across the street with community chores? I think volunteering is a great thing for kids. I think it's something that really teaches them and empathy. I remember, in high school, we all went to a senior citizen center, and and we're assigned to a person, and that was interesting, and actually I found very rewarding. I have one friend who read to blind people, and I think volunteering is a very good way to expand empathy in children. But I guess his question is, I have 5,000 Twitter followers, you have 10,000. Oh my gosh, why do you have 10,000? Why aren't I getting a like on Facebook? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I don't know I completely agree with you that I think having kids get involved in their communities, that's a big part of my book too. We know from the research that is beneficial for kids, and we should keep doing that even in this era of like social media competing for their time. We should absolutely be finding ways to get our kids involved in causes and in our community and helping people. It's very powerful. Yeah, the social comparison aspect of social media, where you're comparing yourself to other people and how many, I don't think it's great. But I also, as somebody who has Instagram, because I have to, as an author, and Twitter, and I use it, I don't think that prevents me from also, being a person who cares about my community and wants to help people in my community. I don't know that one drowns out the other necessarily. I suppose that if you're too involved, if you're obsessed with your social media likes and followers and stuff, then yes, you're going to get maybe more narcissistic in some way, or you're going to be more focused on yourself than others. And I do think that's a problem. But I think you can also use social media, but not have it completely take over your life and, make you a terrible person. It's hard.
So here's another question. How closely do you think parents should monitor so-called controversial books that are assigned to their kids at school?
Yeah, I think if there's my stance on things happening in the world or things that your kids are exposed to that maybe you're not very happy about, my take is that this is an opportunity for you to have conversations with them about it and to share your thoughts, your values, your mindset on this issue. Because honestly, like we can't protect our kids from learning about issues or hearing, different things. They're going to pick up things from social media, from the media, from books, from their friends. So the better thing to do is to have the conversations with your kids as well, and to bring up those topics. And, the more controversial in a way, the more important I think it is for you to talk to them about it, because otherwise, the controversial topics are often the most complex, the most nuanced. And we don't want our kids to just get that information from, friends or from maybe even from their teachers. I don't know. We should also have those conversations. We should talk about it, and we should engage in discussions so that we can ensure that, they're getting a full picture. So I don't think, if they're learning something at school, I don't think you can really say that I'm not going to allow my kid to engage with that. But if you have a different opinion than the book or than what you think the teacher's teaching, then just talk to your kids and have this be a conversation at the dinner table. I think it's an opportunity.
Sure, I think there's another question. Okay, so that was a good question. So what about when children just say, I like to take a subway by myself, or say I like to, or they just say, I think I should be able to. Kids are great negotiators. I mean, I think they should be negotiating peace, but I said, they called and said, I'm having a really good time. Can I come home a half hour later than curfew? And so how do you, value these things? I'm pretty soft sell, I'm saying if you're having a good time, but when once my son said, oh, everyone's going to be away. I was thinking of inviting 10 friends over. He was 14. He said, and I said, no, I don't think so. He said, well, what could go wrong? And I said, everything. Everything could go wrong. So.
Yeah. These are the hard things that we as parents have to navigate, right? Where we don't know necessarily what the right answer is. And I think there could be multiple right answers and maybe multiple wrong answers to it, depending on your kid and the situation and what they're asking. But I think, with something like your child asking to ride the subway alone, this is another opportunity for a conversation and sit down and say, okay, well, so you want to do this. Let's talk about, why you want to do this. And let me talk about what my concerns are and what could go wrong. What are my worries? And maybe the idea then, when you talk about, well, what happens if you get lost? I need to make sure that you have the skills to be able to make the right decision. If you take the wrong subway, like, how do you know what to do? And you try to assess, like, do they have the skills to do this? Do they have the wherewithal to get out of a bad situation? Maybe you also set up sort of incremental, the things that they have to be able to do to prove that they're ready for this. So, okay, well, you want to go on the subway. How about first, you show me that, you can do, I don't know what, like, just go 2 stops on the subway and get out and call me, or just break it down into smaller things that help you to recognize whether they have the skills to be able to do this safely and that they're trustworthy. So I know I talk about this too with, like, when should your kid get a phone? And I make a list of, like, here are the skills that your child needs to have and to show you that they have before they're ready to get a phone. They really need to understand privacy. They really need to, understand how to engage in certain ways online. So, and they need to be able to not lose things all the time because otherwise they're going to lose their phone. So you just think about, what are the skills that my child needs to have to be able to do this. With staying late at a party, yeah, I think that's a call you have to make based on, your parenting philosophy. Is there a reason they shouldn't stay later? Do they have an early morning class, or is it a Friday night? All these things are going to weigh in. Are they generally trustworthy? Should you reward them for asking rather than just staying late? Maybe, maybe you say, well, thank you for not just missing curfew. Thank you for calling. Yes, I will let you have the extra half hour because you made the smart choice to call me and ask, and but it really depends. It depends on you. It depends on your child and where where you are in your relationship with them and a lot of things.
One of the smartest things because I've written about kids too, and someone said that kids actually like limits. I mean,
Yes.
they're testing you, but they actually like to have limits.
Yes.
And I
They
thought
need them.
that was a great thing. You also talk about rewards, and so that we shouldn't be giving so many rewards to kids. We should kind of ration rewards.
Yeah, the research on rewards is really interesting. I think there are circumstances where rewards are okay, especially if it's something that a child really does not like doing. So for instance, my daughter has a really bad needle phobia, and we were doing some exposure therapy with her to get ready for the COVID vaccine, where I was basically asking her to look at videos of people getting shots and smell isopropyl alcohol and all these things that she was terrified of. And I did give her rewards after these things because I wanted her to consent to do them. And, it was terrible and horrible for her. So a reward is okay in that kind of scenario. But when we reward kids for things that they could get some kind of intrinsic satisfaction out of doing, whether that's doing their homework or cleaning their room, or rewarding them for something they enjoy doing, that can be detrimental because the research suggests that undermines their intrinsic motivation for that thing. Nobody really likes to feel controlled. And when we give rewards and we say, if you do this, you'll get this, kids feel like we're controlling them, like we're manipulating them. And this can mess with their internal reward system. And they think, well, am I only doing this because, I thought I liked art and now I'm getting rewards for doing art. And so maybe I don't really like art anymore. And the research really shows that when you start rewarding kids for things that they naturally like doing, they stop enjoying those activities after you've rewarded them. They stop wanting to do them. So it really does undermine that motivation. So I'm careful now about rewards, and I try not to give them for things that, I do think a child could get some satisfaction out of on their own.
I also want to talk a little bit about extended families.
Yeah.
Lots of divorce rates, people get remarried, they bring in other kids. And for some people, this can be great. For other people, it can just be disastrous. And is there research on that? TV has Modern Family, but not Modern Family is a kind of, I once said, none of these people have any money trouble.
Yeah. I don't talk about that in my book. So, and I hesitate to go beyond what I have looked at the research on. And so I'm sure there probably is research. I mean, we know that kids can thrive in families that are not, two-parent households, for sure. We know that. But, we also know that if there's a lot of turmoil in a family or a lot of, fighting that kids see, that's not good either. Yeah, but I don't know, the specifics of what you're asking. I'm not sure I have the data to answer.
So we're almost at the 8 o'clock hour, and I'm sure you want to love to get back to your kids and help them. Or you want to talk another hour? We can do that too.
Yeah, right.
November 30th, I'm speaking to Lena Zeldovich, another science writer, and she wrote a book called The Other Dark Matter: The Science and Business of Turning Waste into Wealth and Health. And then she's a SWINY member and National Association of Science Writers member. And then Brendan Burrell wrote this book, which is The First Shots: The Epic Rivalries and Heroic Science Behind the Race for the Coronavirus Vaccine. And this book just was published. I'll be speaking to him December 8th. So I have homework.
You do.
I do it.
Those look like fantastic books.
Yeah, they do. Anyway, so I want to thank you so much. And tell us, some people don't explain what is Substack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Substack is essentially a platform for writing newsletters. And Substack makes it pretty, sorry, I don't want to sound like I work for Substack or anything, but I chose to put my newsletter on Substack because they make it easy to have a newsletter, to, you know, have it sent out to how many people you want. And you can have your newsletter be free. You can have set up a paid option where you're asking people to subscribe and pay. And there's, you know, ways that you can like send certain newsletters out to free subscribers and certain newsletters out to paid subscribers. And, you know, they do take a cut of the money that you earn, but they make it easy. And so that's one of the reasons that I've done it. So I've only had it for about a year now. And I only just went paid a couple of months ago, but it's been really fun. And it's a really nice way to just engage with my readers, and to also, you know, it's very nice to have, you know, the contact information of people who really like my work, so that, you know, when I have a book come out, I can put it in my newsletter and know that it's going out to my fans. And that's really powerful as an author and as a writer. So it's just a great way to stay in touch with my audience.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Melinda, for spending time with us. I want to thank Joe for taping this. We'll be putting this on our YouTube channel in the next day or two. And let me see if there's one more question. Okay, do you have time for one more question?
I can try, although I looked at this question and I'm not sure I have a good answer.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
It's a good question. It's a good question. You know, yeah. So essentially, if we're, you know, if we're interacting, if the young generation is interacting so much more online and not face to face, is that sort of affecting, you know, the development of empathy, you know, because we do read so much from people's faces and body language and stuff. And I do think if people really aren't spending time face to face at all, then yes, this would be a problem. But I think probably during the pandemic, I think, you know, there is some evidence that like little kids who it did not have as much engagement with other humans and even with their parents who were very busy, that we know that is kind of interrupting some cognitive development in little babies. But I wonder, I think it really depends on, you know, are teens really not spending time with each other at all? I think they are. And yes, they're also doing social media, but I think we have to think about, you know, they're still getting face-to-face interaction, I would suspect. And the question is it enough to, you know, help them understand emotional cues and stuff like that? And I think a lot of that is developed early in life too, before kids are using social media. So I hope that it's not interrupting the development of, you know, emotional literacy and that, but it's hard to know for sure. It's a really good question.
And we got a comment from Kafna Shelke to everyone. This was terrific. Thank you, David and Melinda.
Oh,
I enjoy that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone. We'll hopefully see you November 30th. And everyone stay safe out there, because as we see in other countries in Europe, COVID has gotten a lot worse. And it's going to, you know, winter's coming and people are going to be indoors more, and stay safe during Thanksgiving. So, okay, take care and thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, this is great. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
And where can you get your book?
Oh, anywhere. You can get it on, you know, from independent bookstores. You can get it on Amazon. There's also an audiobook and an ebook. So you can get it anywhere books are sold.
So when we did this in person, we would order books, and they
Right.
would sign
That's
them and all
nice.
this kinds of stuff. And that was kind of
Oh
fun.
yeah, you can get signed copies of my book through Split Rock Books in Cold Spring. You can order on their website and say that you want a signed copy. It's my local bookstore, and I'll go in and sign it, and I can personalize it for you
Okay.
or for kids or grandkids or whoever.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Good night.
You too. Bye-bye.